And we're back on the Fowler Show. Listen, folks, I got to tell you, the Supreme Court, as we talked about it this whole show, the Supreme Court made a lot of landmark or not so landmark decisions this week, and one of those decisions that came down on Monday regarding the Voting Rights Act in this country. And a little bit of background: the Voting Rights Act was passed after a lot of struggle and a lot of strife in the 60s, and it's always bipartisanly has been renewed and renewed and renewed because we all understand the importance of protecting the vote. And nobody understands the importance of protecting the vote more than our friends at the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. We are joined by a senior advisor to the president and director of all things voting over there at the NAACP, and a new friend to the Fowler Show, Jotaka Eaddy. Welcome to the show.
Oh, hello. I'm so glad to be joining you today.
Thank you. Tonight, or depending on, but people are going to hear the show at different times. So that you might hear us, they might hear us in the morning, they might hear us at night, they might hear us, whenever they would like. So, but tell me something. Now, this Supreme Court case decision that came down, I mean, let's get some background here. So it was a 5-4 decision, and people get, so I think in some people's mind, they say to themselves, well, if the Voting Rights Act still exists, they only took down a section. But this section is by far one of the most important sections to the actual act. Is it not?
Absolutely, absolutely. And really to clarify what happened in this decision, first of all, let's say this was an activist move by the court. The court's majority in this decision was an activist court. In its opinion, and what the court did is clear to note that it did not strike down Section 5 per se. The court upheld the constitutionality of Section 5, which is the tool and the aspect of the Voting Rights Act that allows the Department of Justice or a 3-judge panel to pre-clear any election change, whether it's redistricting, whether it's moving a polling place, or whether it's implementing a law such as photo ID, prior to the law going in existence. That actual tool is still intact. But what the court did do was find a backdoor way of freezing Section 5. And what it did is it invalidated Section 4, which has the formula for which it determines which states are actually covered under Section 5. So essentially what we are faced with is almost like having a car with no keys. So we still have the car, so we still have Section 5, which allows for the protections prior to a law going into effect, but we don't have the keys. We can't move Section 5 because the formula for which the states are determined to be under that jurisdiction is now ruled unconstitutional. So in effect, Section 5 is frozen because of a technicality.
But I love that explanation, because I think what you didn't hear that a lot from mainstream media explaining it like that, and I think that's the best way to explain it, is that Section 4 is what gives Section 5 so much power, right? And sort of having the federal government's ability to police states where there's history of segregation and their jurisdictions. For the record, Brooklyn is one of those jurisdictions for folks who don't know, so it's not just about the South. It takes that ability away. So in lieu of, and so I think you're right. So I think the next step to that means that because the federal government now doesn't have the formula to develop which states should be monitored, the states that should be monitored, in most cases, have the ability to sort of do whatever they want to do now.
Absolutely. I've been saying we will see, and we've already started seeing the wild, wild west of voter suppression. Already Texas, Mississippi, South Carolina, North Carolina, all of these states are in queue to start implementing voting law changes. And it's so important to note that it's not just photo ID or proof of citizenship, which we know the court invalidated Arizona's proof of citizenship law, but it's also redistricting maps. It's also local jurisdictions that have the ability to purge voters, and local jurisdictions that also have the ability to move polling places. So all of those changes are now, it's wide open right now.
And I love that part. I'm glad you brought that up, because we're going to talk about it later on the show, but I do want to get your opinion on it, because we saw exactly that. As soon as it happened, immediately following, Texas put forward their old voting maps that were originally, not allowed by the Justice Department. They pushed them forward, and what those voting maps did, in a nutshell, was it gerrymandered districts so that African American elected officials and minority elected officials were separated from parts of their district that they needed to win. For example, a Latino congresswoman or a Latino congressman or congresswoman or a Latino state representative or state senator who needed the business side of your district to raise money to run, would lose the business side of the district and only keep the other side. So they already started suppressing the vote and, crushing the minority representation as soon as the bill went up, as soon as the Supreme Court made a decision.
Absolutely. They were waiting in queue. This year, we saw at least 82 voter suppression measures in state legislatures at the beginning of 2013. And a lot of folks were saying, well, the election is over. Why is there still voter suppression? Well, all of these legislations were waiting in queue because a lot of extremists in states across the country were ready to move in to action as soon as the Supreme Court made a decision. And they were hoping with bated breath for the Supreme Court to invalidate Section 5. And while Section 5, I want to stress, Section 5 was not touched in this case, but Section 4, which controls the formula, and basically the list of states was invalidated. So if there's no list of states, or if the formula is invalidated for which jurisdictions can be under the rule of law or jurisdiction under Section 5, what it essentially does is freezes Section 5. And so all of these states now are just moving all types of changes. And you talked about Texas. I think, we all were on YouTube and on the internet and Twitter following, the great triumph of Wendy Davis. And we know now the maps that Texas wants to put forth would just take her right out of office. I mean, so it's just really important to make the connections of all of this is connected. So when we see an attack on voting rights, it's not just about, keeping people of color. While that is a large part of it, it's also attack on women, it's attack on young people, it's attack on workers,
senior citizens.
It's attack on everybody, and it's attack on all of our movements.
And I want to talk about that before I get you out of here, and before you got to go, because she's a busy woman, she's got to go out there and register voters and educate people about the process. Now, what I don't want to happen in the progressive community and the African American community is for people to look at this case in a vacuum and say, oh, just the Voting Rights Act, and it's just this one thing, and besides that, life is hunky-dory, similar to the Clarence Thomas, majority opinion or his concurring opinion. When you put it in play, right, you put the fact that they've gutted the Voting Rights Act after all the voter suppression laws that happened, and the fact that they had record number of African-American turnout because we were not going to be turned away, we were not going to be turned down, our right to vote was not going to be taken away from us. You put all those things into play with the fact that in Sanford, Florida, there's an individual that might, we're talking about George Zimmerman here, he might walk after killing an African-American boy in cold blood because of the Stand Your Ground law, which in my opinion is a law that was created for pale, stale, and male people to kill black people unwarrantedly and walk away from it. So you put all those into play, and you put yourself in a situation where we're really at the cusp of a new civil rights movement here.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we are in a moment where right now it's a moment where it calls for leadership. It calls for us to organize, and I think particularly as young people, I'm not over the age of 40. I consider myself still young. It's our moment. I used to honestly walk around and say, oh man, I was born out of my time. I knew if I was born, about 70 years ago, I would have been right there with Miss Fannie Lou Hamer when she said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I would have said, me too. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I would have been marching in Selma. And I fantasize about what it would have been like to do that. But I know right now, this is our moment. This is our time. And we have to all ask ourselves, if not now, when? And if not us, who? This is a Joshua moment right now, and it's a time for us to stand up and really fight. And if we don't do it, there's so much at stake, and it's important that we're marching. We have to take the first step. Congress has to hear from everybody, and they particularly have to hear from young people.
Yes,
And I know, and I've said, we break Twitter down when it comes to entertainment, and we can break Twitter down about Northwest and about everything else, and all the shows on television. We got to break Twitter down about our rights, and we got to start breaking it down about voting rights.
That you're exactly correct. We have to break it down about our rights. This is not a movement for our parents. This is not a movement for grandparents, young people. This is our movement. Miss Eaddy from the NAACP, thanks so much for being on the show. We really appreciate you. We'll be right back after this break.